Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar in which we are going to hear about a really exciting plan that's underway in Ithaca, New York to decarbonize its building sector. It's a plan that I know is relevant to all of our member states who are working to meet aggressive decarbonization goals. So I'm really pleased to have everybody with us. I'm Rona Cohen at CSG East, and I just want to give a shout out to my colleague Dylan McDowell, who's at the Zoom controls today. So just a heads up that we are recording this webinar and it will be available on our website by early next week. And we hope to have ample time for Q&A. So please feel free to type your questions into the chat box or during the Q&A period to raise your hand. And now I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Massachusetts State Senator Marc Pacheco, the Dean of the Massachusetts Senate. Senator Pacheco is co-chair of the CSG East Energy and Environment Committee and founding chair of our state legislative climate alliance. And in Massachusetts, Senator Pacheco is the founding chair and current member of the Senate Committee on Global Warming and Climate Change, among his many other roles. Senator Pacheco, as always, I thank you for your terrific leadership and vision on everything related to climate policy. And over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Rona. And I want to thank you and all of the CSG staff for the tremendous leadership that you provide to us in being able to put together this very unique programming for legislators, not only in the Southeast here, but legislators who have joined our climate alliance from across the country that take advantage of not only participating in the broadcast, but also are able to follow up because we are recording this webinar. So I just want to begin by saying a huge thank you to Dr. Luis Aguirre-Torres, who is leading the implementation of the Ithaca Green New Deal, including the city's decarbonization and climate justice strategies. He is also the co-chair of the New York State Climate Impacts Assessment Society and Economy Technical Working Group. And prior to joining the city of Ithaca, Dr. Aguirre-Torres spent 12 years assisting Latin American countries develop innovative and climate change legislation sponsored by USAID and the US State Department, and providing technical assistance for the design, implementation, and financing of long-term climate change and climate justice projects sponsored by the UN Industrial Development Organization, the IFC World Bank, and the Breakthrough Energy Coalition. Dr. Torres was recognized as a champion of change by President Obama in 2012 and by the White House Office of Science and Technology in 2016. Dr. Torres holds a PhD in electrical and electronic engineering from the University College in London. He will present to us what is happening with the implementation of the Ithaca Green New Deal, and we will have time for some questions and answers from the discussion and have a little bit more of a discussion. I have heard Luis speak and present a few times before, and I am very honored that he has chosen to join us at CSG for this presentation. right now, so many legislators from throughout the Northeast and throughout the whole US are starting to work with their municipal officials and looking at ways in which we can decarbonize the built economy. Ithaca is taking a major step forward in deciding to decarbonize some, I think it's some 6,000 units of buildings across Ithaca, and be able to do that by 2030. So let us hear from Luis, if I can call you that, with your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator and Rona and everybody else for the privilege of being here and share with you what we're trying to do in the city of Ithaca. It is true we have a very ambitious plan, and we have been doing some of these presentations with the main objective of sharing what we have learned, sharing the knowledge that we have accumulated in the process, but also getting some feedback, because we understand that this is going to be an ongoing process, and it's going to be very difficult for the city, for the state, and for the entire country to achieve carbon neutrality. But we all understand that that's the route that we need to take. That's the way things need to go from now on. I'm going to share my screen. Feel free to interrupt me. I'm going to be watching my screen, so I will not see hands being raised. So please just scream very loud and interrupt me if you want to ask a question. So I'm going to share my screen now. Can you see my screen, Rona? Yeah, perfect. So once again, I thank you, by the way, for such a kind introduction, Senator. It's very awkward when somebody reads anything about you. No, I think it's always an interesting moment. So I am from Mexico. I went to school in England. I live in the US. I have 2 kids, 1 cat, and my life is entirely devoted to climate change. That's what I do and what I love doing. I joined the city of Ithaca in 2021, 2 years after the city had passed the Ithaca Green New Deal, which is a resolution basically stating that the city was committing to fight climate change. And it was one of those things that it was already a historic moment, but the reality is that how it happened is probably more interesting, because it all started in Washington that same year in January, right, with Representative Ocasio-Cortez, who with Senator Marc started pushing for a Green New Deal. And that started an incredible movement. And the Sunrise Movement basically opened a chapter in Ithaca. And the first thing that they did was to camp outside the mayor's office and be next to Common Council all the time, and eventually convince them that the right thing to do today is to fight climate change and make a real commitment. So the city decided to commit to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. But not only that, at the same time, we were going to try to address all those historical inequities, economic inequality, and racial injustice that exist in our community and pretty much everywhere in the entire country. So, yeah, no small task. The problem was COVID. COVID hit, and then, nothing could be done until 2021, when they decided to hire me, this dude here. And the idea was, and it was funny because they gave me the resolution. They were like, okay, your job is to implement this. And anybody working on climate change, when somebody tells you you need to fully decarbonize a city in 10 years, it's kind of crazy. But when they tell you it's 8 years, it's even crazier. But challenge accepted, and here we are. The first thing that we needed to do was translate that into something that we could monitor, something that we could measure. So we understand that we need to remove carbon emissions. We need to make sure that that we do that right. But that means that we need to reduce energy intensity. We need to reduce energy intensity at least by 50% in the city if this is to be successful, because then we need to reduce carbon intensity for every energy unit. And these are the 3 parameters that we're following in the city. This is what we need to do. Obviously, that means that we need to do a number of things. We are very fortunate because the city of Ithaca is in New York State, and in New York State, the governor, just in the most recent State of the State address, basically stipulated that we're going to go for it. We're going to put everything in it, and we're going to try to reduce 85% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. At the state level, that is a huge number. And imagine about having 100% electricity by 2040, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe all of you have seen the announcements in terms of offshore wind and everything that we're trying to do in New York State. It just helps, but it's very aggressive. just thinking about energy saving metrics, we're talking about the equivalent of removing 530 billion 100-watt light bulbs. I mean, this is what we're trying to do. And it's one of those tasks that seems impossible until you start doing it. And then you realize it's actually possible. In the city of Ithaca, we identified that we have 400,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions. 100,000 vehicles going at the same time. It's a small city with a very simple economy. About 40% of our emissions come from buildings, out of which I would say, 70% come from space heating, then a chunk from water heating, and then the rest from other uses inside buildings. But at the end of the day, it's energy use inside buildings that makes up 40% of the emissions in the city. Then 40% more comes from transportation, including passenger vehicles, heavy-duty vehicles. Then the electric grid contributes with about 15%, and then 5% goes to waste and other activities. So in an effort to make this easy to understand for the city council, we also needed to simplify the work. So we know what metrics we need to follow. We need to reduce energy intensity and carbon intensity. But then we know the emissions, and now we understand we need to do basically three things, and if we are lucky, attempt a fourth one. So the three things are energy efficiency across all aspects of the economy, the decarbonization of the electric grid, and the electrification of everything that can be electrified. In the world, about 65% of the energy stock can be electrified. In the city of Ithaca, I estimate that about 85% of what we have can be electrified. And then, the technology is not quite there for carbon capture, at least not in an affordable way, but we believe it's going to be there within the next 3 to 5 years. So we're very hopeful that by the time we're done with the first 3 stages, we're going to be able to take on the next one. So thinking about these 400,000 metric tons of CO2, we believe that if we were to implement a citywide energy efficiency strategy, which means getting people off single passenger vehicles, it means thermal efficiency in buildings, we can just reduce 30% of the emissions, and then 30% more through electrification. But if we're going to electrify everything, then a lot of it has to come from the decarbonization of the grid, and then eventually from carbon capture and sequestration. So this is our plan. This is what we're going to do. It's a simple plan. It's difficult to implement because, the moment the rubber hits the road is when things get really interesting. So thinking about it in a different way, what does energy efficiency mean? It means this. It means that our homes, our buildings need to be as thermally efficient as possible. The appliances that we use need to be as efficient as possible. In terms of waste, we need to think about circular economy, which, funny enough, has to do with buildings, has to do with deconstruction, for example. We need to get people off single passenger vehicles, and we need to get them to use transit, but we also need to offer different modes of transportation so people can take it. We need to electrify everything that can be electrified. And by that, we mean this. We mean space heating, we mean water heating, cooktops. We need to think about induction range, for example. The way we dry our clothes, and this is very interesting because if we think about substituting electrifying clothes dryers with heat pumps, then it's a funny thing because if you think about it, the same installation that we need for an electric clothes dryer is the same installation we need for an EV charging infrastructure in the house. So, we can do the two things at the same time, because with that, we started thinking, and then if we were to think about this in terms of co-deployment and the benefits that it could be if we are already doing all this, then to do decarbonization, we can think of installing solar systems, on rooftops. And then we can think about, the benefits of co-deploying solar with heat pumps, solar with EV charging infrastructure, solar with energy storage. But then recognizing that, not everything can be electrified, we need to think about low carbon fuels. And we're working on hydrogen pilot programs. We're thinking, okay, the wastewater treatment plant has a pyrolysis system that we could use to generate hydrogen, for example. Then we're electrifying transit, we're electrifying our refuse trucks. We're thinking about this in a very holistic way. And we understand that we're going to have to make use of some carbon capture technologies. But to do this right, we need to think about in terms of climate justice. There is a key component of equity that we cannot lose sight of. It comes from the federal government. Justice 40, the CLCPA in New York is calling for 35 to 45% of the benefits being redirected to disadvantaged communities. In the city of Ithaca, we think we have to do even more. So we have a climate justice program that accounts for 50%. And what that means is 50% of the benefits have to be shared with disadvantaged communities. Or what that means is if we are electrifying a building in a neighborhood that is not low income, that means that we are at least doing one building in a low-income neighborhood. And that way we don't lose sight of what is more important, which is make sure that people have a chance to a better life. We need to set a baseline. So we have our climate action plan. We have, I would say, a very innovative way of achieving democratic engagement and developing our workforce. Because one key component for everything, just look at the screen and think about, if we're going to replace all of these with electric alternatives, if we are going to have our homes be more thermally efficient, if we're going to implement circular economy, there are so many jobs that today don't exist, but will exist in our community. There are so many industries that will attract companies, that will attract employment. So eventually we're going to transform the economy entirely. So workforce development is such a key component in everything we're doing. But then we need to look at the infrastructure that we have in the city. You know, in the city of Ithaca, our distribution grid has way past the age of obsolescence. I mean, we have a very hybrid system. You know, in some neighborhoods, we really can't do electrification if we don't do upgrades, because it's so old that it will pretty much catch fire. So there are a number of things that we need to do, because at the end of this decade, the city is going to look so different. And if you think about it, we are having distributed energy resources everywhere. Imagine that the charging station is talking to the solar panel, is talking to the grid. Everything is interactive with the electric grid. And what that means is that the city of the future, Ithaca as the electric city of the future, has an issue. And the issue is, how do we manage the resources that we have? So it's no longer about demand. It's about supply of energy. And how do we manage it? And all that is the holistic view that we're taking in the city of Ithaca. And there are different scenarios, and all of them, you know, can be sized differently, and the cost associated with it can be very different. So we can have a plan where we do just 35% of energy efficiency retrofitting in our buildings, 30% of electrification, mostly focusing on the space heating, and 25% of decarbonization. That means installing probably 250 kilowatts of solar on the rooftop and no ground-mounted solar. But we can go beyond that. We can, you know, have a strategy for transportation that creates synergies with the strategy that we have in buildings and energy storage. Or even more than that, we can start thinking more holistically. We can start thinking about every garbage truck needs to be electric then also. And if we go for 100%, even the leaf blowers need to be electric. We're talking about an absolute transformation of the infrastructure in the city, and that is needed if we want to do 100%. The cost of this transformation in the city of Ithaca is estimated around $2 billion. In all likelihood, it's going to be less than that, because part of what we're trying to do is create economies of scale and understand the economic benefits of doing this at the same time. In fancier words, we're understanding the economic benefits of co-deployment of certain technologies that will allow the creation of horizontal and vertical economies of scale that will allow us to reduce costs by probably 30 to 40%. So there is a chance that it might not be $2 billion, maybe just 1.5, but that is a lot of money for a city like ours. So we've been very busy doing this. And I just want to take you through the key moments last year. One was in June 24th last year, we presented before the United Nations our plan, our strategy. And what we wanted to do is to make sure that the mayor and the city council was making a commitment before the United Nations, ratifying as a city the Paris Agreement, and therefore committing to change things. That attracted investors, that allowed us to have conversations with international investors and allowed the city to raise $100 million in just 2 months to achieve our electrification plans. And that led to an RFP in August, and it led to other projects that are, you know, creating synergies like community choice aggregation or the deployment of a 6-megawatt solar project in the city. And then eventually having the whole city voting, we are gonna decarbonize the city. We are doing this working very closely with other organizations like NYSERDA and Siemens, because we need to understand the impact on the infrastructure grid as a whole. But we are working with a large number of partners, including the Department of Energy. So right now, what we're looking at is, you know, we started this revolution last year. We were not the only ones. The state was thinking in those terms. And there's 2 things in the State of the State address that are really important. One of them, the governor announced the creation of a $25 billion green electrification fund. We are doing that in the city of Ithaca. One key component of our plan was the creation of the Ithaca Electrification Fund. And I was so glad to see that the governor was doing that for the whole state. The other thing is, we decided that this is just too expensive. When we started looking at these $50,000 per residential building, $70,000 per commercial building, we needed like $450 million for the entire city. We need to leverage private capital. We need to find a way of doing that. And I am so happy to see that the governor agrees that is directing NYSERDA and other government entities to leverage private capital to make this possible. Because honestly, that is the only way to go. There is just not enough money in government to do this. We have other programs that I'm not going to go over them, but there are 12 different programs that are creating synergies to make this happen. And this is important because we cannot do them sequentially. We need to do them together, all at the same time. So I just want to say something about climate justice, because this is just so important for what we're trying to do. We have information from, and guidelines from Justice 40 that comes from the federal government and from the CLCPA in the state, but we have a census that doesn't really track, what our demographics are really like. For example, I can tell you that in the city of Ithaca, 47% of white people own a home, 17% of Black people own a home, but statistically 0% of brown people, Latinos, own a home. And what that means is home ownership, or the lack thereof, becomes a stressor when compounded with climate change, becomes a threat multiplier. Therefore, home ownership becomes an issue of climate justice. And we're taking that into account in the city. So we are hoping that at least 50% of the economic, environmental, and social benefits are going to be redirected to climate justice communities that we are identifying, modeling a lot of what we're doing on what the state of Massachusetts did. We're addressing workforce development in a very different way. We believe that this transformation is going to require about 1,000 people that don't live in Ithaca today. And it is 30,000 people in our city. So where are we going to get 1,000 people to electrify every single building, to retrofit every single building, to get electric vehicles and do maintenance on them? So we decided to partner with other cities. So, some of us decided to travel to Elmira, Rochester, Syracuse, Binghamton, and talk to the mayors, talk to the different organizations. And we created a partnership with 115 different organizations to create a green jobs corridor. And the premise is very simple. The city of Ithaca has a market that is ready, is ready for the take right now, but we don't have the people. There is a lot of people that are unemployed or underemployed in these other cities. What if we were to share the cost of transportation? What if we were to share the cost of childcare, language support, and we were to bring people to Ithaca and then have them participate in apprenticeship programs, on-the-job training programs, and then they can go back to their own cities and become the foundational element for a local workforce. We are transforming 3 economic regions in the state of New York, affecting 2.7 million people. And I believe this is probably the most important part of what we're doing, because all of this needs to be done by somebody. But let's start with this, because this is what our electrification and decarbonization plan mean. We're substituting this, we're installing this, and the idea is to go for it and have carbon neutral buildings. We need to look at it from a design point of view, and for that we have our energy code supplement that demands no new building or major renovation is going to have fossil fuels starting in 2026, similar to what New York City announced in December, except we did it in June. Construction and operations. That means we need to make sure that they operate with less and less carbon intensity in energy use, and eventually make sure that we don't have any emissions inside a building from energy use. Our building stock is peculiar. We're an old city. It is incredible to see that 41% of our buildings were built before 1920. Then, just after 1980, we have 9% of the buildings. This is an old city. The materials that we use are so different depending on which decade, which technology, which code you were using when these were being built. And then the mix is, we have 83% residential buildings, but 70% of those are rentals. And about 2/3 of those are from people that don't live in the city, the building owners. So the challenge is at every level, and it's going to be very, very different. But for example, we have a number of buildings that we need to retrofit and electrify that qualify as historical landmarks. And what that means is we need to follow some very specific and expensive guidelines if we are to do this right. So it's not that easy, and we're working very hard, but we have some challenges. And the challenges vary from financial, when we look at the potential costs, thinking, residential, including single and multifamily homes, it could be between $5,000 and $35,000. When we're talking about commercial buildings or mixed-use buildings, we're talking about $70,000 per building. So in general, it's more than $400 million that we need to make this happen. In terms of economics, it doesn't always work. It works really well with fuel oil, with propane, dual fuel, but it doesn't work well with natural gas. It's not going to pencil in. And what that means is we need to follow a programmatic approach. This is the idea of doing an entire city so we can achieve the economies of scale, the bulk purchasing power that we need, but at the same time, think about it from a financial and economic point of view and know that if we were to create bundles, the numbers may work for everybody, not just for a few. And from a financial point of view, the return might be the return expected by investors, but not necessarily something that everybody needs to pay for. And I'll get into that detail in a second. But also in terms of infrastructure, right now, we finally did the calculations. This is fresh information. We believe that by electrifying the city, the electric load in winter is going to be 3 times the load in summer. And right now, the electrical infrastructure in the city is not built for that. We just can't do it if we don't make major investment in some key parts of the city. Some substations are already winter peaking. What that means is we cannot do electrification if we don't invest at least $40 to $50 million in upgrade the infrastructure. So that means the Public Service Commission needs to be involved, the federal government, the Department of Energy. Certainly, this is a problem that we all can solve, but we need to work together. And then, as I mentioned before, the workforce. The workforce is going to be hard, but we can make it happen. And we have a plan, and we're not the only ones. So in terms of just very quickly looking at whether the numbers work, yeah, well, they do work when we are talking about, some technologies and some fuels. But in the case of natural gas, you can see on the right side that the operational cost may go up because natural gas is subsidized and it's very difficult to beat those, but we have a way of doing that. Because, if we're talking about commercial units, it works. The numbers work even with natural gas. If we're talking about, for example, multifamily units, it works. If we're talking about fuel oil, it works. So the only thing that we need to worry about is when the numbers don't work for natural gas in single family residential units. That's when we need to be creative and we need to figure out the best financial structure so we can make it work. So this becomes infrastructure, it becomes synergies and even low carbon fuels to make it happen. So at the end, the objectives of our program are, first, performing some energy assessments to understand, what the energy profile is for every building, what needs to be done to achieve a maximum level of thermal efficiency. Then we need to analyze, if we can, apart from replacing all the thermal loads, add solar or EV charging infrastructure. And then we need to think about what is this going to do to the grid, keeping in mind that we need to have equity always at the forefront of everything that we do, because the buildings that we have, as you can see in these pictures, they may be similar to some that you find in your neighborhoods. It might be different, but these are really hard. These are really hard to retrofit and electrify. In recognition of that, we decided that we need somebody with the expertise. But if you think about it, what we did was this. We analyzed the building stock. We analyzed that some people are doing this, but they are doing this one by one. And if we continue on that route, we're going to finish in 2100. So we need to have a transformative project. So the economies of scale are there, but there is fragmentation in the industry. There is a lack of sophistication from an economic point of view in terms of the options that we have. And there are a number of things that need to be corrected. So we need somebody with experience, mostly on the finance side for this. The technology is there. We understand the policies. It's finance, and that is at the core of everything. So we had an RFP, and the RFP was looking for a company that could provide this service at an affordable rate for the city, but also that would have the necessary financial innovation to make this happen. Once again, everything else we know about it. It was the financial element that we needed to go for. And this led to incredible press, and it's true, people started paying attention. And if you look at every single headline, people were talking about the money that was raised. But really is how you change people's lives. It is how you actually play with the finance. It's how you brought together different organizations. These are the key partners in everything that we're doing, but the reality is there are at least 57 organizations that are part of the electrification program today. And that number is bound to continue growing. The key partners are Block Power as the program manager leading the implementation, but Alturos as the main investor for the city. This is an example of a tool that we developed with Cornell University. And this is awesome because right now, if you give me an address in Ithaca, I can tell you exactly what the energy profile is like. I can tell you whether through retrofitting and thermal load electrification, we can save any money. So this is important because, before going and doing the energy assessment, we need to have these machine learning based simulation models that can allow us to see whether it's worth the effort today or in 3 years. So I'm going to take just 5 more minutes to finish this, but I want to show you a couple of things that we did. First, it's how efficient our approach can be. First of all, we look at this in the same way we would look at the diffusion of technology. So we know that, there is the laggard. There is about 34% that because of political affiliation really will not do this, no matter what we tell them. That's what legislation is for. But then there is people that are just waiting for an opportunity. The early adopters, the early minority, they want to do this. They already have Teslas. So they're waiting for an opportunity to change this. And that means we're left with 50% of the city. But in those, we have about half of those that are actually low-income people. And we have the economic incentives from the state, from the federal government, from the utility company, from the city government, that allow us to offer an economic incentive and make this program so affordable that would be difficult to refuse. So a lot of our effort is going to the 30% that we have left. And this has to do mostly with behavioral economics. If you think about it, that 30% represents the notch that we need to bring everybody on board. And that means you don't have to be completely overwhelmed by 100% taking. What you need is identify what the notch group is, and that's what you go for. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is something very, very complicated. But I'm going to try to show you exactly what we're doing with a diagram that may try to simplify that. So we couldn't bond this. We needed private investors, but we have private investors. Okay, how do we articulate this? Because we need to create a financing facility with $100 million, for example, for our pilot program for 1,600 buildings. But that financing facility is going to upfront the costs that local companies need, so they can offer this at no cost, not initial cost, to anybody. They can talk to residential customers, to commercial customers, enter into energy service agreements. They could think about this as electrification as a service. But we're using money, private money, which means we need to create enhancements to guarantee financial inclusion. So we need a loan loss reserve. That is a first loss insurance. And we need that to be backed by the state government, because New York State Constitution doesn't allow the city to do this for private citizens. So we needed the state to do this. We needed the New York Green Bank to do this. We needed NYSERDA to participate. Because then when you add the incentives that come from the state, the federal government, and the utility company, and you repurpose that money, then you can create a program that basically allows the repayment based on energy savings solely. And if you do it in a programmatic fashion, then the numbers work for investors, number works for local companies. But then you need a program manager. You need to have somebody talking to the investors, creating the building bundles that are necessary to make it work, and then working with local companies to enable the work to begin. And this program manager needs to report to the city, but then the city, was looking for a way of making this even more affordable. So we decided, and the city was gonna try to work with these companies in developing the necessary workforce, but also in the creation of the Ithaca Electrification Fund. Because if we were to have an Ithaca Electrification Fund that was created from community contributions, philanthropic matching, and municipal matching, we could cover the interest rates, and we can make this program at zero interest for anybody, and even create economic incentives for low-income people to participate. And at the end of the day, what we have is a distribution of risk that is different, because one, we got the money from private sector, we created a financing facility, but then 20% of the risk was transferred to the state by having a loan loss reserve. And that is a first layer of insurance. But if you were to put a second layer, let's say reinsurance on the entire project, defined as a stop loss insurance 80-20, this second layer of insurance allows us to transfer 80% of the remaining risk to the insurance industry. What does that really mean? It means that the program manager carries 16% of the entire risk, 20% goes to the state, 64% goes to the insurance company, and it's entirely off the balance sheet of the city. There is no exposure for the city, and the liability is contained. And this is where financial innovation became important for us, because this is the only way we can make it happen. In a different way, trying to illustrate something similar. We are using private money. We're going to create financial products that are going to have an interest rate. But the way we're going to do this is we need to figure out how to reduce risk. Because if you think about private equity, if you think about what the capital stack is made of, and you think that, you know, a component of that is the expected return, a component of that is the risk, a component of that is administrative cost. Let's address what we can address. How can we reduce risk? How can we negotiate expected returns? And the answer is, in terms of risk, create enhancements, a diversified portfolio, an entire city, 6,000 buildings with all kinds of buildings. At long-term certainty, we're backing this to be a 20-year program. We can guarantee the cash flow because it's an interesting, because if we do municipal billing, even though in New York State we have a 2% default rate in mortgages, we have less than 1% default rate in utility bills. What that means is we really, really add certainty if we're doing this, especially if we create a program that in 20 years people pay through savings. The amount of cash flow gives enough incentive for investors to reduce the interest rates. But then it becomes really interesting because when we consolidate all the money that comes from state and federal governments, and we use that money instead of distributed and having it fragmented, we actually consolidate it and give it to the financing facility, we reduce already the expectations of return that we pass to the community, which if we add the Ithaca Electrification Fund, it could become a 0% interest program, leasing or lending for low-income people. So finally, we are working, creating priority areas. Priority area 1 and 2 correspond to low-income neighborhoods. We're going to start there because that's what we promised we're going to do. But eventually, we're going to take on the entire city and we're going to transform this and we're going to make it the most efficient. This is my last slide. I just want to share with you that the key characteristics of this program are increasing economic sophistication so we can have multiple options, you know, for every single technology that we're using. We need to address industry fragmentation. We need to promote partnerships. Otherwise, you need to hire 35 different contractors to make this happen. But we need to create economies of scale and acquire bulk purchasing power if this is going to work. Without a workforce, this will never happen. But at the same time, we need to maximize the efficiency of everything that we do, particularly the allocation of money, the allocation of government incentives. That's the only way you're going to really unlock the financial flows that you need in the private sector. Adding risk mitigation and financial inclusion to climate justice, then you have a program that is completely affordable. But if we have the level of transparency and accountability that is needed, then you have a program that could work. We really hope that we're building something that is a blueprint for decarbonization. And at least right now, our commitment is 1,000 buildings, 1,000 green jobs, 1,000 electric vehicles, and 1,000 conversations with the community in the next 1,000 days. And with this, I finish my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Wow. It is a lot to take in for those of us that are looking at this this issue. Thank you very much, Doctor, for providing us that presentation. And thankfully, we have recorded it so that we could watch it 3 more times, and then we'll get a better understanding as to the complexity of all of the items that are here. I would tell everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try to go through them. I want to just begin by asking you, Doctor, if you could just to give us a practical overview of the size, so that everybody that is had watched the presentation can get some perspective in terms of the size of Ithaca, the number of buildings. At the end, you talked about 1,000, but the overall goal that you're trying to achieve, and the number of people that are in the city, so that we can all look at it from our own districts and have a perspective to try to measure it against.
Yeah, of course, Senator. It's a small city where officially 30,000 people, but it really all depends on whether you have Cornell and Ithaca College in session. We can be up to 50,000 people in one day in the city. There is a large number of people that don't live in the city and work in the city. We have 6,200 buildings officially in the city, and about 2/3 are residential, single, and multifamily, and 1/3 are commercial, or at least catalog as commercial. Probably of those, 1/4 are mixed-use buildings, and 1/4 are also special purpose buildings. That includes parking structures, house of worship. Most of our building stock was built before 1920, as I mentioned. The city is about 240 years old, and in general, but the type of weather that we have, the winter can be very cold. We can get a lot of snow. We had temperatures at -15 every so often, and during the summer, it can be extremely hot as it gets in this part of the country. Most of our population, is compressed by really young people, mostly because of the student population. It is about 90% white, and 10%, more than that, probably between 12 and 15% minorities. The dominant minority group is Black, but there is Brown, South Asian, and there are pockets of undocumented immigrants that also live in the city.
Thank you very much for that. And then just one further question to start off. The finances to try to get the amount of private financing into, and you talk, briefly about the reinsurance company, maybe reinsurance companies that are investing. Could you tell us their motivation for the investing and how you were able to do that, and also the relationship with an organization that was called Block Power, and how that whole structure with the city is set up as well?
Yeah, sure. When we started looking at these, we saw that it was going to be a very expensive endeavor. It was going to be very, very difficult for the city to do this. And we have a new conference center that cost the city to borrow a ton of money, and our rating went down a little bit. And then with the post-COVID, economic shock, we are really struggling. So the only alternative was private capital. And when we started looking at that, we try to see what is it that we have to offer. And then we realized that what we have is a city. We have a city that we can see in terms of a market, and a market that includes 6,200 buildings, that if you were to use private capital, that meant you need to create financial products that will generate cash flow. And if we think about 20 years, 6,200 guaranteed customers backed by the city and the state, then it represents a clear opportunity for anybody who's interested in cash flow. As a private investor, why would you be interested in cash flow rather than, for example, profitability? And the reason is, when you think about a private company, for example, you can measure the value of a company based on price to operating cash flow ratio, and that gives you market capitalization. And what that means is, the greater the cash flow and the more guarantee, the more certainty that you have in generating that cash flow, the valuation for the company that you are supporting, or the amount of the market capitalization for the impact investor, for example, it could be very high. So that was the first thing that we try to present to investors. We have a market, we believe we can help you generate the necessary cash flow. But then they understood that what they had was an opportunity to invest in energy efficiency. And they saw that this is just the beginning of a very large market that is going to be global, not only in the United States, but they saw an opportunity. So they were able to think about this in a programmatic way. And the first conversations that we had with them was, can you help me electrify 100 buildings? And they were like, it doesn't work for me if I do 100, but it works for me if I do 1,000. It works for me if I do 6,000. So then we started talking about, okay, how much will it take? And the problem was, when we went for private equity, that the cost of capital was very high, was around 12%. So then we started talking to the different ways in which we could address risk, and we could negotiate a return with them. And when we were looking at risk, we realized that, one, you need to rethink how the money works here. If it's private money, then state and federal money is money that you use to reduce the cost of capital. It's money that you put towards guaranteeing part of the expected return already. But then you are left with something else, still with an expected return and a bunch of risk. So when we were trying to look at risk, we saw that, okay, a diversified portfolio, a very large portfolio, that reduces risk. If we create a credit enhancement, then we can probably cover 23% of the population that are low income. And while we provide financial inclusion, we provide certainty for the investors. And then we started looking at the different shapes this could take. And then we started looking at first loss insurance. And then we figured if we cannot offer a loan guarantee because the Constitution didn't allow the city to do that, we could probably have an insurance product that would be similar to what we use for health insurance, but this time protecting an electrification program. And so it was, okay, who can cover the first loss? And that was the first question that we asked. And we talked to insurance companies. And a couple of them advised us that, it's probably not advisable if you have other alternatives, for example, a loan loss reserve with the state, to have the insurance company covering the first loss. They can actually come in as a second layer of insurance, and they can cover against catastrophic losses. So if we have a loan guarantee through a loan loss reserve supported by the state, expanded by a philanthropic organization, then the insurance company can come in providing this second layer of protection. And by doing that, we basically eliminated risk. We brought risk below 20% for the contractor. And then what that meant was that investors were willing to negotiate down the cost of capital. And then they were willing, because of the size of the portfolio, to negotiate the expected return. And that's the way we brought 12% to 3 to 4%, depending on the specific situation. So the role of insurance is to provide certainty, but also to come in as you would reinsure a solar project. But in this case, what we are securitizing and therefore insuring are the electrification assets. And finally, all this is too complicated for a city government. Our heads, are bound to explode one day. So, we rely on block power. They are the ones that are, we set it all up, and then we hire them to make it work. And we have learned that the hard way. We are good enough to think about it, but we're not really good at executing. So Block Power is the company that we decided was best equipped to understand the intricacies of this project, and they are the one taking it to implementation.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. We now have a number of questions that have come in from those that are participating today. Javier Landron, I'm probably mispronouncing your name, sorry about that. But is there any possibility or plans to scale this plan up to a state or territorial level?
Yeah, and it is a very interesting thing, because we realize that what we are doing is compartmentalizing the different modules, the different elements that need to come to play. So one of the things that you need to look at is Ithaca is progressive, it's different demographic composition, but at the end of the day, you have people that get up, go to work, go to school, go shopping, come back, watch Netflix. And the energy profile of a city like Ithaca is very similar to the energy profile. And it's like a fractal, it's very similar to the energy profile that you will find in larger cities. So that tells you already that the economies of scale that you can that you can achieve in Ithaca can be expanded and can be achieved at the city or even the state level. And then in terms of cash flow, if you look at the city in a programmatic way, we're actually looking at this as a way of extending what we're doing in Ithaca to the town of Ithaca, to the 16 municipalities in Tompkins County, because we believe that we already have the economies of scale. We already have the bulk purchasing power. So it's a matter of just extending it through specific agreements with other cities and other states. So definitely, we are doing this in a way that we believe is replicable and expandable.
Thank you very much. From Delegate Stein's office, we have a question. Was the 1,000 workers needed that led to the Green Corridor creation include workers in Ithaca, or is it 1,000 workers needed in addition to workers already in Ithaca?
No, this is just for Ithaca. And I believe that it is my own estimation that we are just a couple of years ahead of Elmira, for example, or Rochester, probably less compared to Binghamton and Syracuse. There is enough time to have a training program and have on-the-job programs in the city. And we might be able to attract that many workers, but each one of these cities, all of them are bigger than Ithaca, and all of them will require a larger workforce. So 1,000 for us, but for the rest is gonna be many more. Our 5-year projection for the Green Jobs Corridor, exceeds the 20,000 jobs. It's very ambitious, but that's what we're doing with electrification in the country.
Also from Tara Sad, is there potentially money coming in to Ithaca from the infrastructure bill to pay for expansion of the electricity infrastructure needed and necessary to convert to electric power?
Yeah, in the infrastructure bill, there's about $48 billion that are designated specifically to improve on transmission and distribution infrastructure. We plan to work with the federal government to do that. We are holding conversations with the right people. So yes, the answer is there is money, and there has to be for not only Ithaca, for every municipality in the country.
Okay. Javier has asked another question. I'm going to allow you. Why don't you unmute yourself and then correct me in terms of your pronunciation of your name? I think that's important.
It's okay. Don't worry. I fully understand. Javier Cuevas. So Javier Cuevas, if it's easier for you.
Very good.
So do you want me to ask the question?
Yes. What the question? Go right ahead.
So in Puerto Rico right now we have financial oversight board, which makes approving such green legislation a bit more difficult. Right now, it's very hostile to such actions. Right now, it wants to implement a sun tax, which would tax people who already have solar panels on their homes, as if it were part of the electric grid. What could you suggest we could do in order to sell them such initiatives like the Ithaca Green New Deal?
Well, a lot of it is, the cost of doing the right thing, or the cost of, doing business as usual. So, I think in terms of climate change, not addressing climate change, particularly in a place like Puerto Rico, it can be estimated in billions and billions of dollars. So, doing something about it basically, allows you to present a case. But also, if you want to focus only on economic development, the cost of job creation in Puerto Rico, which is much higher than in the US, you can think about this project as a job creator, and you can estimate the cost of creating these jobs, and it would be much, much less than the current strategy. And I think at the same time, you need to think about, strategies to attract foreign direct investment. And there are so many ways of doing that. And I think the green economy pretty much opens the door for direct investment. So I don't know, man. I think it's difficult. This is one of those questions that I wish we had an answer, but for me, that's what I think.
Thank you very much. And I would just add that, Javier, I had the opportunity to visit Puerto Rico, several times, and was there actually on a mission at one point in time where we worked with some of the leaders that actually are members, have been members of CSG, and were very involved. But depending upon who's in charge and what they want to do, we have the same problems. I'm sure that they have the same problems that many of us have in our own districts or our own states, where there are political motivations that are not necessarily interested in moving ahead with a clean energy future, because there are other motivations that are involved with maintaining the status quo. So sometimes these problems are as much political as anything else, from my perspective on it anyway. And I think that as the good doctor is educating us, that when you can actually take the level of comprehensiveness that Ithaca is moving forward with decarbonization and make it work, it's extraordinary, and it's something we all should be looking at much more seriously in terms of energy efficiency in particular. we can't get behind energy efficiency, boy, I don't know where we go to the next level. So other questions that we might have here. I think we've gone through the questions that are on the Q&A chat that have come in. I just want to ask one other question in terms of the, oh yes, Rona, sorry. Rona has her hand up. She's actually doing it the right way. Had a hand up. Now you have to go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. And thank you, Luis, for that incredible presentation. There's obviously so much for us to unpack here. So just a quick question about what you're envisioning for implementation in terms of timing. You had mentioned that there's a certain portion of homeowners who might be hesitant to get engaged in the program. And I'm wondering if they're concerned about disruption to their routines. I know that there have been programs in other countries that enable homeowners to stay in the home while deep energy retrofits are occurring, and that have tried to sort of create greater efficiencies to move down the timeline. So it takes like a week or 2 weeks or something like that. Just wondering if that's factoring into your plans in Ithaca.
That specific option has been considered, but it's just not something that we can do. It's not affordable for us. So what we are, it's a funny thing because we're thinking this between now and 2030, which if you are in climate change, if you work for government, it's just not enough time. But when you talk to a person and you tell them it's between now and 2030, they think, okay, I could do this next year. I could do this in a couple of years. So what we're thinking is to, engage people and help us, schedule these within the next 3 years, at a time that is convenient to you. And then try to, help them, properly schedule these in a way that is doable. And right now, that's all we have for that particular issue, because it is true. People are concerned about so many things. With COVID, it was inconceivable. People were not going to have workers in their house. Now people are, not as worried about that, but they are concerned that they're still working from home and they don't want to have the noise or the inconvenience. So we're going to have to understand how the post-pandemic economy really is, and how much of it has definitely changed to better organize our program. So I think that there is that, and there are a number of other organizations that believe things have to be different. So right now, what we are hoping is that we're going to have, initially, we're going to have periods of review every 3 months. Eventually, it will be 6 months, and eventually it will be annual. But the idea is to pick on all of these things, and we're going to start very slowly on purpose. We're not doing 100 buildings a month. We're doing 10 buildings a month, and then we'll have a better understanding, and hopefully we'll be able to fine tune our message, because I don't have an answer for that, not yet.
Just to follow up on Rona's question, in terms of the financing, which is a part of the the time period when you start to take a look at how long something is going to take. Are you experiencing, or are you looking into on-bill financing with any of the utilities, or with the municipality, or through block power?
We're thinking about that. We cannot do on-bill financing right now, at least with NYSEG. So we're thinking about the different alternatives. One of them is, because we're working, and these are the synergies that I was talking about at the beginning. We're talking about community choice aggregation that enables the CCA administrator to do, billing, and we are hoping that will be the mechanism that would allow us to implement something similar to on-bill financing. But right now, we consider that at the very beginning, and it was an important thing to eliminate risk, but we couldn't do it in the territory that we are. But we're hopeful that we will eventually.
Just for everybody that is, participating today, Energy New England, an organization that's created in Massachusetts and throughout other parts of New England, mostly working with a lot of the public utilities that are out there, some of the municipal light plants, etc. They're providing that type of service in certain jurisdictions. So there might be ways to provide an on-bill financing mechanism that can incorporate some of the strategies that the doctor has gone over relative to what Ithaca is doing. I think Rona came up with the right word in terms of trying to unpack so much of what you have given us here today. And I'm thankful that we've got this recorded, because it will be helpful for, I know, me and so many others to be able to go over this again and again, and we may have further questions. What is your greatest challenge right now in terms of the financing from the municipality perspective, in terms of working with Block Power in putting those contracts together? In terms of the procurement of these services, how did the procurement work in terms of just even engaging Block Power, and then the procurement of other services for the homeowner or for the small business, in terms of making sure you get quality vendors that are going to be utilized?
Yeah, Block Power already issued a request for information, an RFI, to identify the local companies that will be working with us. These local companies will have to, be certified by Block Power, so we can guarantee that it's the same level of service, the same quality of service for every contractor. The distribution is very simple. The program manager will manage logistics and relationships with supply chain as a whole. And that includes, Home Depot, Lowe's, Mitsubishi, Fujitsu for heat pumps. The city has a say in terms of the technology partners that Block Power will work with, but the engagement will be directly with Block Power. And we have a number of technology partners. And I think, some of the greatest challenges are having people first to trust the program. Because it's very difficult people can understand very easily the idea of cash flow, how much money comes in and out and how much I pay, and they can compare with what they do. But it's difficult to understand the concept of a financial return after 10 years. And I really think that the challenge is in presenting this in a way that is easy for people to follow and understand, because, they do something else for a living. They don't need to understand this thing. But so before we have their trust, we need to be sure that we are presenting everything the way they can understand and they can unpack and eventually, join the program. And the other thing, we have done a ton of interviews and conversation. And what we believe the citizens are lacking, or at least that's their perception, it's trust in government and a sense of agency. So if we don't address those two things, it's going to be very difficult. So trust is going to be hard work, and being transparent, being accountable, recognizing when we're wrong, explaining, until people get it. And agency means we need to get them involved. So we need to talk to all these local companies, local organizations that work with minority groups, for example, and having them being part of the program, having them being part of the workforce development program, or simply to participate in this and be first in the line. So I think that it's going to be difficult, but those are the two challenges, trust and agency for those that are to benefit from this program.
Well, thank you very, very much, Dr. Luis Aguirre-Torres. Ithaca has chosen the right individual, I can see, and thank you very much for your leadership and your educating all of us as to what you're doing there, and thank you for sharing your extraordinary background with us. I want to thank everyone for tuning in today, and I want to hand it over to Rona Cohen just to close us out with any details that we may need to follow up, and how we get copies of the recording, etc. And Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Rona, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Pacheco, and thank you again, Luis, for this really terrific presentation. We will have it posted up on our website by early next week, and I'll send around an email to everybody. I know that there were several committee members who were not able to attend because they were called into session in their respective states at the last minute. So I know that there's great interest in viewing this recording, and really grateful for you for sharing your time with us and your expertise, and best of luck with all that you're doing in Ithaca. And hopefully we'll be able to check in with you again sometime in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Rona. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Luis. And again, thank everybody for tuning in.